The danger of casual living is that its consequences are invisible in the beginning. You don't notice it when you skip one morning routine. You don't notice it when you swipe the credit card for something you don't need. You don't notice it when you waste an hour scrolling instead of building. But over months and years, those casual moments accumulate into a casual life. And one day you wake up realizing your life is far behind where it could have been, not because of one catastrophic decision, but because of 1,000 little compromises. Regret has a way of sneaking in slowly. It doesn't hurt while you're making the excuse. It hurts later when the opportunity is gone. You feel it when you see someone else living the life you used to talk about. You feel it when you realize another year has passed and you're still making the same promises. You feel it when you look back and the gap between who you are and who you could have been has grown into a canyon. And that is why seriousness is not optional, it is survival. Here's the truth. Every year that passes without a real decision stacks up against you. The books you didn't read, the money you didn't save, the conversations you avoided, the health habits you ignored. At first, it just feels like delay, but over time, it hardens into regret. And regret compounds the same way interest does. Silently, relentlessly, until one day you can no longer ignore the weight of what you lost. But there's good news. Seriousness also compounds. The day you decide to stop negotiating with yourself, every habit begins to build on the last. Every act of discipline strengthens you. Every sacrifice pays you back. And that compound interest of seriousness will eventually rewrite your future. The choice is yours, regret or reward, delay or discipline. Which one will you let accumulate in your life? I've heard people say, I'll get serious when the timing is better. But the timing will never be better. Life will always be messy. Circumstances will always be imperfect. Waiting for the perfect moment is just another disguise for fear. The perfect moment is a myth. The real moment is now. If you don't decide here with what you already have, you'll never decide. Because life doesn't clear the path for you. You must clear it yourself. I want to be honest with you, there's a cost to seriousness. It costs comfort, it costs convenience, it costs you the fantasy that you can have transformation without sacrifice. But let me ask, isn't the cost of regret far greater? Isn't it more painful to live knowing you could have been more but weren't? That is the real price of casual living. And it's always higher than the cost of discipline. Think of a person who wants to get in shape but won't commit. They dabble in diets, they buy supplements, they try shortcuts, but they won't walk every day. They won't track their sleep. They won't stay consistent. And so they spend years in the same body with the same frustrations. It's not because they don't know what to do, it's because they aren't serious enough to do it. Knowledge isn't power. Seriousness applied to knowledge is power. Think of money. People say they want to escape debt. They declare every January, this is the year I take control. But they still spend on what doesn't matter. They still justify every impulse. They still treat money casually. And casual money habits build financial prisons. Seriousness builds financial freedom. The difference is not intelligence, it's commitment. Now think of time. Time is the most democratic resource in the world. You and I and the richest billionaire all get the same 24 hours. The difference is not in the hours, but in the seriousness with which we treat them. Casual people give their hours away like loose change. Serious people guard their hours like gold. And in the end, time reveals who was casual and who was serious. Here's something you need to hear. You don't drift into discipline. You don't stumble into consistency. You don't get lucky with structure. These things are built by choice, by habit, by repetition. And it all starts the day you draw the line. The day you say, enough, I will no longer wait. I will no longer dabble. I will no longer treat my future like it's optional. I must act now. That is the day everything shifts. And don't confuse seriousness with intensity. It's not about shouting your goals or making grand declarations or burning yourself out in a burst of energy. Seriousness is quieter. It's steady. It's unshakable. It's the decision to keep showing up when it's inconvenient, to keep building when no one is watching, to keep following through when motivation disappears. That is the mark of someone who has crossed the line. So here's the reality. If you're waiting for something to change, stop waiting. If you're tired of starting over, draw the line. If you know there's more inside you, Stop negotiating and demand it from yourself. Not next week, not someday, now. Because the moment you get serious is the moment your future begins to rewrite itself. The day you truly get serious may not look dramatic on the outside. There won't be a parade. There won't be music playing in the background. The world won't pause to acknowledge it. But inside, it feels like a complete reset. The excuses that used to sound convincing suddenly sound ridiculous. The distractions that used to capture your attention suddenly lose their power. The habits you used to protect now feel like chains you must break. And from that moment forward, you begin to live differently, not because life got easier, but because you finally drew the line. I remember when I crossed that line myself. Nothing external changed that day. The same job, the same problems, the same bills, but internally, it was as if I had flipped a switch. I decided I was finished with mediocrity. I decided I would no longer tolerate excuses from myself. And that decision gave me power, real power. The kind of power that comes not from others believing in you, but from you finally believing in yourself enough to act. That's the day your future begins to shift. When you get serious, clarity arrives. You no longer spend hours debating whether you feel like it. You already decided. You don't need motivation because you've built direction. Motivation is emotional. Direction is structural. And seriousness gives you structure. Suddenly, choices become simpler. You don't ask, should I? You say, this is what I do. This is how identity transforms. You stop being someone who tries. You stop being someone who is working on it. You become someone who finishes. You become someone who follows through. You stop living in the fog of potential and start living in the evidence of proof. And that shift is everything. Because once you live in proof, failure no longer scares you. Setbacks don't destroy you. Discomfort doesn't stop you. Instead, they sharpen you. They refine you. Let me tell you something. Effort without identity is fragile. That's why so many people start strong and fade. But effort built on identity becomes unshakable. When you identify as disciplined, you don't ask yourself if you're motivated to act. You act because it's who you are. When you identify as committed, you don't wonder if you'll keep going. You keep going because it's your nature. Seriousness reshapes identity, and identity sustains action. Now, here's where most people miss it. They confuse wanting with deciding. Wanting says, I'd like to have it if it's convenient. Deciding says, I must have it no matter the cost. The difference is night and day. Wanting waits for the right conditions. Deciding creates them. Wanting talks about change. Deciding lives it. Think about history's great builders, Carnegie, Ford, Disney. None of them had perfect conditions. Ford built cars in an age when the horse was king. Carnegie built steel in the middle of economic upheaval. Disney went bankrupt multiple times before creating his empire. They didn't wait for conditions, they created them. Why? Because they were serious. The same principle applies to you. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need all the answers. You don't need a miracle. You need to decide, and once you do, your mind starts working differently. Your priorities sharpen. You become more selective with your time, more protective of your energy, more intentional with your relationships. Because seriousness is contagious, it spreads to every part of your life. Others will notice it too, not because you announce it, but because you embody it. You won't need to explain yourself anymore. Your results will explain for you. Your standards will become visible in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you treat time. People will see that you expect more from yourself now. And when you expect more from yourself, life begins to deliver more to you. But don't miss this. Staying serious requires maintenance. It's not a one-time decision. It's a lifestyle. You must guard it daily. Guard it with structure. Guard it with accountability. Guard it with standards that don't slip just because life gets busy. Because the moment you let standards slide, your identity begins to slide too. Jim Rohn once said, "Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better." Seriousness is the decision to stop wishing for an easier world and start building a stronger self. That's the real work. Not waiting for the winds to change, but adjusting your sails. Not hoping for less struggle, but becoming someone capable of greater struggle. And here's the promise. The moment you step into seriousness, you reclaim control of your life. You stop being a victim of delay, of distraction, of circumstance. You take back your power. And once you've tasted that power, once you've lived one day fully serious, you'll never want to go back. Because casual living feels light in the beginning, but heavy in the end. Serious living feels heavy in the beginning, but light in the end. Choose your weight. One crushes you with regret. The other crowns you with results. Which will you carry? The moment you raise your standards, the entire world begins to respond. It doesn't happen overnight, but slowly, surely, the results of your seriousness start to show. The projects you used to postpone begin to take shape. The goals you used to only talk about begin to produce evidence. And the confidence that comes from following through is unlike anything else because it's not borrowed from a book, it's not borrowed from a seminar, it's not borrowed from anyone's encouragement, it's earned. It's yours. See, most people don't lack desire, they lack standards. They say they want success, but they tolerate distraction. They say they want discipline, but they tolerate inconsistency. They say they want wealth, but they tolerate careless spending. And here's the rule. What you tolerate, you reinforce. If you tolerate sloppiness in your work, you will repeat it. If you tolerate excuses in your language, they will multiply. If you tolerate procrastination, it will become your lifestyle. But when you raise your standards, you create a new baseline. What was once acceptable now feels beneath you. You don't skip workouts because someone might see. You don't skip them because your own identity doesn't allow it. You don't waste money because you need to prove something to others. You save and invest because you're a builder now. You don't chase distraction because your attention is too valuable to give away freely. Standards rewrite identity, and identity rewrites destiny. When you raise your standards, you no longer act from emotion, you act from principle. You don't ask, do I feel motivated today? You say, this is who I am, so this is what I do. Motivation is fickle. Standards are steady. Motivation fades. Standards sustain. That's why seriousness is not about hype or emotion. It's about principle and commitment. And here's the paradox most people miss. When you raise your standards, your problems don't disappear. They evolve. You no longer wrestle with chaos. You wrestle with complexity. You no longer struggle with survival. You struggle with strategy. Your battles don't end. They upgrade. And that's a good thing. Because struggle is not a sign you're failing. Struggle is a sign you're growing. Casual people fight the same low-level problems year after year. Serious people fight new battles, higher battles, because they've outgrown the old ones. Napoleon Hill once wrote, you cannot change your destiny overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. That's exactly what happens when you get serious. Your direction changes. And once your direction changes, your destiny has no choice but to follow. Step by step, the compounding force of seriousness pulls you into a new life. But staying serious isn't automatic. You need to protect it with structure. Think about your day. If your mornings are random, your life will be random. If your schedule is chaotic, your results will be chaotic. Seriousness needs rhythm. It needs order. That's why you design routines, guard your priorities, and set boundaries around your time. Not because routine is glamorous, but because routine is the soil where discipline grows. And don't forget your environment. If your surroundings don't match your seriousness, they will pull you back to casual. If you want focus, clear the clutter. If you want growth, surround yourself with people who expect more from you, not less. If you want strength, cut ties with habits and influences that weaken you. Your environment is either reinforcing your seriousness or undermining it. Choose wisely. Then there's accountability. People think accountability is weakness, but it's one of the strongest tools you can use. When you're serious, you stop fearing accountability and start seeking it. You welcome someone who checks in on your progress. You want someone to remind you of the promises you made. Why? Because pride isn't your priority anymore. Progress is. When seriousness, structure, environment, and accountability align, your life begins to transform quietly but powerfully. Your schedule reflects your priorities. Your habits reflect your identity. Your space supports your focus. Your relationships push you higher. That's when you stop fighting yourself and start building momentum. And momentum is what makes success feel inevitable. Let me make this plain. Casual people are always restarting. They live in cycles of getting back on track. Serious people build momentum, and momentum multiplies their effort. It's the difference between pushing a boulder uphill every Monday and riding its force once it's rolling. Casual living drains energy. Serious living compounds it. So the choice is clear. Either you let casual habits pile up until they bury you in regret, or you let serious habits stack until they elevate you into the life you were meant to live. One way or another, you're building something, either a prison or a platform. The difference comes down to whether you're serious enough to raise your standards and hold the line. And here's the beautiful truth. When you raise your standards, life has no choice but to rise with you. Opportunities search for people who are ready. And the best way to be ready is not to wait, but to expect more from yourself before anyone else does. That's how you attract the very future you've been chasing. Not by wishing for it, not by waiting for it, but by living serious. Today, in every decision, in every habit, in every hour, seriousness is the turning point, but staying serious is where the real transformation happens. The first spark of commitment is powerful, but without a structure to protect it, it will eventually fade. Life has a way of pulling you back into old patterns if you don't build systems strong enough to hold your new identity. And that's why most people relapse into casual living, not because they didn't mean it when they said, "I'm serious," but because they didn't build the guardrails to sustain it. Structure is what turns a decision into a lifestyle. Think about it. If every day you wake up wondering whether or not you'll do what you promised yourself, you waste energy on indecision. And indecision is a silent thief. But if you've already structured your day, if you've already blocked your mornings for growth, your afternoons for building, your evenings for rest, then the decision has already been made. All that's left is execution. That's the freedom seriousness gives you. Not the freedom to do whatever you feel like, but the freedom from having to argue with yourself every day. Your calendar becomes proof of your seriousness. Look at someone's schedule and you can tell whether they're committed or just interested. A serious person's calendar is intentional. There's time for learning, time for building, time for health, time for rest. And those times are protected. They don't let everyone else's urgency become their emergency. They don't let the trivial invade the essential. That's what seriousness looks like on a random Tuesday when no one is watching. Now, let's talk about your environment again, because it matters more than you think. If your home, your workspace, your digital world is filled with distractions, don't be surprised if discipline feels impossible. Discipline cannot thrive in chaos. It needs order. It needs clarity. It needs an environment that matches your seriousness. If you want focus, clear the clutter. If you want to grow, fill your environment with tools and reminders that push you forward. If you want discipline, stop surrounding yourself with people and places that tempt you back into casual living. Seriousness requires courage, not just to say yes to the right things, but to say no to everything else. And then there's accountability. Do not underestimate this. People who are casual avoid accountability because it exposes their inconsistency. But people who are serious seek it out because it strengthens their consistency. They welcome someone who checks their progress, someone who holds the mirror up when they start slipping, someone who reminds them of the standard they chose for themselves. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. But let me warn you, staying serious is not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. It's not always exciting. Most days it's repetitive, ordinary, even boring. But that's exactly what makes it powerful. Because consistency is born in the boring. Success is built in the mundane. Your future isn't shaped by one grand gesture, but by the quiet daily choice to show up regardless of how you feel. That's what separates the casual from the committed. Think of it like planting a tree. The first day you put the seed in the ground, nothing looks different. The next day, still nothing. A week later, maybe a small sprout. Months later, something fragile begins to grow. Years later, you have shade, fruit, roots deep enough to weather storms. That's what seriousness produces. Not instant gratification, but lasting transformation. But you must water it daily, protect it from weeds, and refuse to abandon it when progress seems invisible. Most people fail because they confuse intensity with seriousness. They go all in for a week, burn themselves out, and then collapse back into old habits. That's not seriousness. That's emotional hype. Seriousness is steady. It's not about sprinting for 7 days. It's about showing up for 7 years. It's about building something so strong that even when life shakes you, You remain rooted. And here's the paradox. When you live serious, your life doesn't get easier, but it does get simpler. You stop wasting time on decisions that don't matter. You stop scattering energy on distractions. You stop bleeding confidence through broken promises to yourself. Instead, your standards carry you. Your systems protect you. Your habits shape you. And suddenly the weight of life feels lighter, not because the load has decreased, but because your strength has increased. This is why I say seriousness is not just a moment, it's a lifestyle. The moment you decide is powerful, but the systems you build around that decision are what turn it into a new normal. And when seriousness becomes normal, when discipline becomes identity, when consistency becomes instinct, that's when you unlock momentum. And momentum is the most powerful force in personal growth. Casual people are always starting over. Serious people build momentum. And once you have momentum, the very same work that felt impossible before now begins to carry you forward. Like a flywheel, the first pushes are heavy, but once it spins, it's unstoppable. That's what seriousness buys you, the gift of momentum, the gift of knowing your best days are not behind you, but ahead of you, waiting for you to keep showing up. So the question isn't whether you can get serious, you can. The real question is whether you'll stay serious. Will you build the structures, the standards, the environment, and the accountability that keep you aligned? Because if you will, then not only will your life change, it will keep changing. Not for a week, not for a month, but for the rest of your life. There's a cost to staying casual, and it's higher than most people realize. You don't see it on day one. You don't even see it in the first year. But over time, the price shows up in ways you cannot ignore. It shows up in the opportunities you miss, the conversations you avoid, the doors that never open because you were never prepared to walk through them. It shows up in the slow erosion of confidence because deep down you know you're capable of more, yet you're doing less. That knowledge eats at you. It gnaws at your spirit, and eventually it hardens into regret. Casual living is like a slow leak in a tire. At first, it's barely noticeable. You keep driving, you keep moving, but over time, the pressure drops and suddenly you're stranded. That's what happens when you live without seriousness. Every missed opportunity, every delayed action, every excuse slowly drains your potential until one day you realize you're stuck, going nowhere. The tragedy is that people get used to it. They normalize mediocrity. They normalize starting over every January. They normalize being almost ready but never fully committed. And because everyone around them is doing the same thing, it feels acceptable. But just because something is common doesn't mean it's right. Just because most people drift doesn't mean you were meant to drift. You were built to grow, to rise, to build. Casual living is the betrayal of that design. Time is the most unforgiving currency. You can lose money and earn it back. You can lose possessions and replace them. But the time you waste by being casual never returns. Every day you delay is a day you can never recover. And here's the painful truth. One day you will look back and realize that time was never waiting on you. It was moving all along. The clock is ticking whether you act or not. The question is, will you use that time to build, or will you let it slip into the void of someday? Life doesn't reward intention. It rewards execution. It rewards those who are serious enough to stop wishing and start building. If you stay casual, life will pass you by, not because you're not good enough, but because you were never committed enough. You were always about to start. You were always almost ready. You lived in the waiting room of your own life, hoping the perfect moment would arrive, but it never does. And this is the part most people don't want to face. There's no secret coming. There's no miracle waiting around the corner. There's no external force that will suddenly drag you into discipline. The only thing that changes your life is the moment you decide you've had enough, the moment you choose to pay the price of discipline instead of the price of regret. Because one of those prices will define your life. Yes, discipline has a cost. Waking up early costs comfort. Saying no to distractions costs convenience. Building a routine costs freedom in the short term. But every one of those costs gives you something in return. Health, freedom, peace, pride. Regret costs nothing up front. It feels cheap, easy, effortless. But in the end, it takes everything. It takes your confidence. It takes your energy. It takes your future. Think about your potential. Think about the books you could write, the businesses you could start, the relationships you could restore, the wealth you could build, the health you could reclaim. That potential does not wait forever. Unused potential rots. it withers away, and when it's gone, it doesn't return. That's the true cost of casual living. Not just the pain of regret, but the death of potential. But here's the good news. Seriousness compounds just like regret does. The day you get serious is the day your rewards begin multiplying. Every disciplined act builds upon the last. Every decision to follow through strengthens your foundation. Every sacrifice pays interest. Over time, seriousness becomes momentum, and momentum is the engine of transformation. I've seen it again and again. Someone drifts for years, dabbling in growth, flirting with progress, but never fully committed. Then one day, they hit the breaking point. They decide enough. And from that day forward, everything begins to shift. Their external circumstances don't change immediately, the same bills, the same job, the same environment. But internally, the drift ends. They stop waiting, they stop negotiating, they get serious. And because of that, life begins to bend in their favor. So ask yourself, what's the cost of not getting serious? What is it costing you right now in energy, in confidence, in time? And more importantly, what will it cost you 10 years from now if you don't decide? Because that cost doesn't shrink with time, it compounds. And the longer you delay, the heavier it gets. But the opposite is true as well. The sooner you decide, the sooner the rewards begin to compound. And the longer you stay serious, the greater the return. That's the power of seriousness. It doesn't just change what you do, it changes who you are. It changes how you walk, how you think, how you live. It gives you back your power, the power to stop drifting and start directing your own life. So here's the challenge. Will you keep waiting for life to settle down, or will you settle it yourself by drawing the line today? Because nothing changes until you do. And once you do, everything else will have no choice but to follow.